The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Package Tourist, hosted by yours truly, The Package Tourist, and the magical mystery tour called Life, Matthew DiBiase. Tonight's episode is being taped on the Comfortably Zoned Network, and my guest is the man who made this show possible, Mr. Ralph Tyko, my mentor, my friend, my guru, and my radical conscience. Ralph was born in Jackson Heights in Brooklyn and joined the Air Force after graduating from high school, where he spent his military stint in California. After leaving the Air Force, he worked for an insurance agency while pursuing a career in comedy, writing, performing, and producing comedy shows. Throughout his life, Ralph has loved baseball and saw many a game at Yankee Stadium, the Polo Grounds, and Ebbets Field. He also, for a time, was the West Coast representative for Topps Baseball Card Company. Later on, Ralph branched out into doing cable TV sports show, and then in 2012 he switched to podcasting, and then in 2016 he established the Comfortably Zoned Network, where not only he himself does podcasts, but he also gets America's best and brightest to do their own shows. 2 months from today, Ralph's memoir, Comfortably Zoned, a Nevada Pine Tar, co-authored by my dear friend George Grimm and featuring forwards by legendary sports author Peter Golenbach and former Major League Baseball pitcher Mark Littell, will be published on Amazon. In it, Ralph talks about his life, baseball, his adventures and misadventures, and the wonderful and wacky people he has encountered and inspired during his lifetime. Ralph, what led you to write your memoirs?
Well, that's very high praise. A guru. My God. God bless both of us if I'm your guru. Matthew, thank you so much for the nice words. It's not exactly a memoir. It's more to honor the guests and the hosts of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network that I put together, and in a sense it honors me, but more so it honors them. I'm truly blessed to have been associated with the folks, including yourself, that have made up this endeavor. I set out to be interview interesting people, and my God, it branched 2,900 some odd offerings, and still going, still happy to do it on a weekly basis, and can't wait to talk to you tonight.
Ralph, how did your parents mold you into becoming the Renaissance man you eventually became?
It started with my grandparents, who basically had me in the first 5 years of my life, and they taught me, spoiled me, in fact, and I'm proud of it, to think that anything I wanted to do, I could do, as long as I had enthusiasm and passion. And they laughed at me when I was cute, and it made me think that everybody in the world would do that, just be cute. Little did I know that they were the only people that thought I was really cute. But and you, Matthew, I'm your guru. You must think your guru is cute on some level.
I do, man. I love you, man. Love you, man.
I love you too, Matthew. You've been very loyal. I'm blessed to have your friendship.
Thank you, Ralph. That means a great deal to me, man. You know, Ralph, when you were growing up, you were so lucky to grow up during the golden age of New York baseball, where nearly every year a New York team was in the World Series. What was it like watching baseball during that glorious time period?
Well, basically, the way I explain it is the sense of entitlement that a kid or a fan got by living in New York in those days. The entitlement was that the World Series is going to be played in your backyard every frickin' year. And it was from 1947, my first year on Earth, born in 46. My first baseball season was 47. It was indeed the World Series was a New York thing, if you will. And so with that, we based what we went into our heads with what the broadcasters gave us. It was mostly radio in those days, yet all three major league teams were on television all the time. You didn't have you only had access to one game. There wasn't 2 or 3 televisions in every household, that type of thing. And what it did, it established a rivalry between all these three teams in such a close proximity. It wasn't saying, well, I like the Yankees, I like the Dodgers, I like the Giants. You either loved or hated any of those teams. And what it, for me, it taught me loyalty and irreverence, because you would respond in a way that was ridiculous when your team was questioned. Like, I can remember thinking that my Giants were the best team in town, and they were the third best team in town, although they were great. So it was a great time to grow up. My mother was a Yankee fan as a kid. She attended the Lou Gehrig Luckiest Man Alive game, the speech, and there's some irony behind that. 2 ironies, basically. In 1956, I came home from school and caught the last 2 or 3 innings of Don Larson's perfect game in the World Series. And I'm sitting and watching with my mother, and she told me that story that in 1939, she went to Yankee Stadium from Mount Kisco, New York, with 2 or 3 classmates who my grandfather copped some tickets to that game. And she has a vivid memory of watching Lou Gehrig at that time. And it turns out that the Washington Senators were in town that day at Yankee Stadium, and they were the team that lined up on the third baseline, the Yankees on the first baseline, or vice versa, in that very famous picture. And she told me that story of going to that game while we were watching Don Larson's last few innings. Remember, I'm 10 years old at the time. And it was my second real baseball thrill, because when I was 5, my grandfather, 4 and a half, my grandfather took me to all 3 stadiums, Polo Grounds, Ebbets Field, and Yankee Stadium, when at that age, and I got to see DiMaggio's last year, and Willie's first year, and Mickey's first year, and just as a little kid. Wow. So this was kind of icing on the cake to my fandom. And as a matter of fact, for just a variety of reasons, good, bad, or indifferent. My mother and I weren't as close as a lot of parents and children. I won't get into this until I'm forced to lie down on your psychiatrist's couch. But that aside, I think that moment of coming home and watching Yogi run into Lawson's arms after hearing that story was our closest moment, my mother and I's closest moment. And it contributed to my philosophy of doing podcasts where everything has to run into some sort of reason for being. I don't know how to explain that, but one of my first guests when I decided to do a network show was a fellow by the name of George Case III. Oh. And his dad was a former Major League player, really good one at that. The fastest man of his time in playing baseball. There's a very famous story of when he raced Jackie Robinson. George, over the years, has contributed stories about the 40s when his dad played in the major leagues, and before, when he was growing up as the son of a major leaguer, that was incredibly interesting to me. And we soon found out that, or at least I soon found out, George didn't care much for my mom in those days, but that George Case lined up at that on the baseline to watch Lou Gehrig the day my mother was there. And in 1961, when the Washington Senators were first formed, my family took a trip, a little vacation, to Washington, D.C., and it was the year that George Case, his dad, George Case, the ball player, was a George Case Jr. George Case, our friend, our mutual friend, is a George Case III, for clarification. And George Case Jr. was on the third baseline when my mother attended that game. Wow. So there's some sort of real weirdness about, and I experience it almost monthly when I talk to a player, a coach, a manager, a writer, a reporter. We seem to, there's something in there that's a connect from one player, from one generation to another. One story leads to another story, and that's what the network is about. Kibitzing.
Yes.
Bring players on who have a passion, an interesting voice, a smile in their voice. Bring people on, not just players. The best interviews are the people who are around the players. Oftentimes, the skill of being able to perform something athletically doesn't transcend to telling the experience of their lives. So I find that interviewing people who are articulate enough and do care enough to express it, interviewing them about the player or about the times or about the experience works better. It doesn't have, so I've had many players give me great interviews, but more times it was the non-player, the reporter, the fan with passion. that's how it goes in the life of Ralphie Boy.
Now, you mentioned earlier, did you say earlier that the Giants were your personal team? Is that correct? And if so, who was your favorite Giant?
Well, aside Willie, which is who is everybody's favorite Giant, you couldn't help. We talked about him on the anniversary of you and I, on the anniversary of his 90th birthday. Yep. And we did a show that was just illustrated my point. Willie couldn't have described Willie's life better than I think we had Noel Hind and you and I. And so Willie, hands down. But when I was a real kid, I'd look, I'm 4.5 years old. We sat in the right field bleachers, my grandfather and I, and he'd go over the lineups and who was playing where, and Stanky at, this is 51, Stanky at second, Dark at shortstop, and Alvin Dark had that. He was the captain of the team. What do you say? You're a little kid, and it's the shortstop of your team. So I would have to say Alvin Dark, and I'm in good company as far as having him as a hero. The great writer, pitcher first, Jim Bouton, tells the story of him being a Yankee fan and going to Yankee Stadium or going to the Polo Grounds and Alvin Dark going up to him and saying, "Hi, Mr. Dark, can I have an autograph or whatever?" And Alvin Dark says, "Take a hike, kid." That was beautiful. So we share, Jim Bouton and I do. And Alvin Dark has always been, to me, the most complicated of humans to learn about his life, to follow him. He's a complete right-wing Southern bigot, crazy human, but he was a product of his time, and I'm being kind. He was indeed a Southern boy, good old Southern boy. But, there's something about Southern people when you talk about racism that there was an expression I heard years ago that Southerns hate the race, the race. Southern white people hate the race of the black race, the Afro-Americans, but they love the individual people. And we talked about Willie and him coming up as a young player. Alvin Dark was the captain of the Giants at that time, and nobody embraced Willie more except Leo DeRocher, the manager, who, speaking about being spoiled, he spoiled Willie in a good way, but you spoil somebody, it's a mixed bag, like with me. Yeah. So, but Alvin Dark was the guy that had his arm around Willie, much the same as Pee Wee Reese had his arm around Jackie. Now, I can't really compare the two verbatim because what Jackie went through was unique, like no other. He was the first. He also came into the big leagues in Brooklyn, which was a city that was a city of it. You couldn't describe it any other way than Brooklyn. There was nothing else to say. There's so many intangibles there that we don't have time to get into. But and Jackie was like, this was 4 years earlier when Jackie broke in, 3 or 4 years earlier. But so what I want to say is that Alvin Dark, like all of us, was neither black or white, and I'm not talking about color. I'm talking about how you look at him. He was gray. He was a mixture of good and bad, like we all are. So when I look back upon him, I can do it with some thought. When he was calling Orlando Cepeda inconsequential, and his 120 RBIs didn't mean anything, he was damaging and horrible. But you look back upon it, there were some things he did in his career that I can't say made up for it, but it explained a lot. And taught me, baseball teaches us to put everything into perspective. Everything, it's a humbling game. When you're going good, it's going to come back and get you. When you're going bad, if you hang in there, your slump will end, and that kind of thing. But excuse my rambling. That's my life. I ramble, I putter, and I nap.
Ralph, that's quite all right, man. It's quite all right, Ralph. The thing, okay, now after you got out of the Air Force, now you spent most of your Air Force career in the West Coast, but after you got out of the Air Force, you decided to stay on the West Coast. What led you to leave New York City and make a new life on the West Coast? How come you didn't go back home to New York? What was it about California that made you want to stay there?
Whoa, that's a 12-prong question, and it's a great question, but there wasn't just one thing. I knew that the pace of New York, that the commuting, the forced commute, with whatever you want to do, if you're going to be successful, and I always pictured myself as going to be successful. I wasn't looking, I didn't see life the way I did. I didn't see, like, my idea of what it is to be successful was nowhere near what I think success is in life now. But the commute, the mellowness of the weather and the mellowness of the people, and just for me, I needed a start where I could live my life in this country, and where I can go back and see my parents and my family and my friends and what have you. But it had to be done out here. It's just the way it was. If you live out here, I was stationed in Northern California in the Air Force. It was the Vietnam era, and I got to stay at Travis Air Force Base, halfway between Sacramento and San Francisco, the whole time. So basically, it was Northern California weather is either spring or fall, depending on how you look at it, 24 months or 12 months a year. There are no extreme winters, and there are no extreme summers. And that went a long way in my decision. New York in the winter is a bitch.
I know.
What can I tell you? And New York in the summer is a bitch. And I knew I'd be dealing with the commute. I'd be living in New Jersey. Yeah, I picture myself successful, living in New Jersey, commuting into New York, living on Long Island, commuting into New York, an hour and a half a day.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that. And, I'm all about, a nice day. I'm a professional recreator, have been all my life. And it's tough to recreate when it's 20 degrees in the winter, and the humidity in the summer, the humidity is 98. And so that's a lot of it. Regrets. As Tally says, regrets. I've had a Jew.
Oh, God, I'm ready to pass out.
Okay, well, I could be a Jew that causes regret.
You're beautiful. Oh, beautiful. I needed a laugh right now. I had a rough few days. Thank you, Rob. I needed that. Thank you, Doctor. Getting into laughs now, please tell our listeners, what led you to decide to take up a comedy career? What led you to pursue it? And did you pattern yourself after any type of specific comedians? And what was your brand of comedy?
My brand of comedy bordered on a combination of Lenny Bruce without the brains that Lenny had, and no one had his brains on certain level. I like to think I had some George Carlin going for me.
Oh, wow.
And I did some impressions. I got to open for Robin Williams, and I had some very, very good times. I was doing comedy and met a woman. I got into it late and met a woman named Diane Satin, and her and I decided that she was a career person, and by that time I was doing comedy, and we thought it would be great to have a kid together. We did, and I became the house dad, the stay-at-home dad, while she pursued her career as a college professor. And I spent the first 5 years of my son's life being the stay-at-home dad. She did some comedy as well, and unfortunately, when Philip was about 2, she had a heart attack, became sick, and forcing me to basically stay home more, get off the road, and one thing led to another, and I just took care of the kid for his first 5 years, and the comedy career was put on hold. And through those first 5 years, I didn't find much that was funny. Raising a kid is intense, whether you're doing it as a single parent, which I wasn't, or you're doing it in any sort of way. There's an intenseness there that, at least for me, it didn't coincide with standing up and being funny. That's just a throwaway. I wasn't able to derive the child rearing experience, put that into an act, make it, so there you go. I pursued other things. I was fortunate enough to be given the opportunity to do a cable television show, and for Cal State University.
Wow.
They gave me the opportunity to bring back some of the people I grew up following baseball with.
Oh, wow.
And in a series, I had, let me list the guys that came into the studio to give me a live interview. And this is after or while I was developing contacts through my Topps gig, which was to sign players for the major leagues and obligate them to Topps for their baseball cards when and if they reached the majors. And I had the West Coast.
Wow.
I covered the Northwest League and the California League, and I developed some contacts. So I was able to bring into studio guys, people like Leonard Coppett, for instance,
wow.
Charlie Silvera, Joe DeMaestri,
wow.
Charlie Fox, the Year of the Fox in California, Hank Sauer, and a host of folks, of people from the media, to help me get an idea of what life was like on the inside in baseball, not just between the lines, what it was like to live in the culture of baseball. And when I started to do podcasting, I found I was comfortable in talking to these people who I had spent 15 years of my life interacting with. I'd spend summers going from hither to yon, signing players to their first contracts. Will Clark, Robbie Thompson, Jr., I can't think of his name, on Seattle.
Griffey Jr.?
Yeah. See, my mind goes from here to there. I went from George Griffey, and you know who entered my mind from there was, of all people, George Foster, because Griffey played, just as you said this, so I'm thinking George Foster was a Met, get him, did I do a show on him? That's what my life is, just talking to these players, and it gave the show for the cable network gave me the confidence to do what I always knew I could do, because I just kibitz and I ask questions that are interesting to me, the answers of which are interesting to me, and they're bound to be interesting to others, because I have a pretty good sense of it all. I say that modestly, but maybe immodestly. I don't know. You tell me. I'm your guru. You should be. You should know. Is it modest or immodest? The truth.
You're having. Yeah. You're doing what you're doing. You're doing what you want to do, and you're doing excellently. I mean, that's what.
It's the only thing. It's the only thing. Besides taking care of my kid, those 5 years, and being a pretty good partner with Tally late in life. It's pretty much the only thing I've done with excellence. I've done things and been successful for short periods of time, but life is 100-yard not a 100-yard dash. It's a marathon.
Yeah.
And if you can't do it for the whatever it is you do for a long time and prove it, it's just the stuff you do as a hit and run thing means nothing. And I had the good sense early on to archive every show on the Comfortably Zoned Network on YouTube. And
Ralph, Ralph, what keeps you alive in this day and age when every day we're dodging death either by pandemic or by gun violence or even political violence? What keeps you alive, Ralph?
What keeps me alive is that I want to see how it's going to turn out.
Yeah.
I can't. I don't want to be deprived of that. I want to see my kid's a young adult. I want to see if he goes on to have kids of his own. I want to see Tally have success that she deserves as a sculptor, a sculptoress. Something. She's an incredible artist. And she's at a point in life where she's taking it seriously, and I want to see her do well. I want to see if I can make it turn out that for the best. I guess that's the best way of explaining it. I just want a happy ending. And Yeah, and getting to my book, which we talked about, the book is complete. It's being edited, and it doesn't have a happy ending. It has a pragmatic ending, because what we podcasters have concluded is that baseball, our love, is basically on a downward spiral.
Yeah,
it is.
That's to say, yeah.
It's sad to say,
yeah.
But they have been doing things to the fans. When I was 11, the Giants and Dodgers moved. So that's a good example of you take a passionate 11-year-old and you tell him his team is moving. How could you do that? Baseball's a sport. How could a city lose their team? And then you systematically bastardize the game so that in extra innings, as things stand, and it's not likely to change from here on out on this, if anything, the rule would be worse. The game is decided after the beginning of each inning, they put a runner on second base.
I know.
Now, why don't you get a short fielder and make it a softball game?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why have pitch on the hand and you have some beer at second base? Make it a beer league.
Yeah.
And don't take it too seriously if you're going to do that. But to be serious, there's no way to compare. This is something I love to do. When I was a kid, Ted Williams was the best left fielder around. Or was it Stan Musial? Or was Stan Musial and Ted Williams, were they better than Ty Cobb? Or was Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays better than Tris Speaker?
Yeah. And
to do that, you'd have to go to the record book and to lore. Just numbers don't tell the story. It's the lore of baseball, the intangibles that don't appear in box scores and what have you, to find out who was great and who wasn't. They've deprived us of that by making it impossible. And it was impossible to compare who was best. I just didn't know it as a kid. But before blacks came into the game, African Americans, the game was different. Jackie Robinson came in, you couldn't compare eras. But you really can't compare eras now. They've absolutely impossible. The game has changed from every 10 years they're doing something, starting with the DH, and now these ridiculous rule changes that will end up eventually in a home run derby deciding what's extra inning games. I guarantee they're experimenting with that, and there's an owner right now who is just Manfred, who is just out of control, and I'm saying this not to prove a point, not to start a debate, to express my sadness and the sadness of the overwhelming number of podcasters and contributors on this network, guests on this network, who are sad.
Yeah.
Hal Bach, 43 years as an Associated Press reporter. He taught journalism after his career was over. There he'd go to a game every day of his life. He can't even watch a game anymore. He'll keep up with the scores. He told me on a podcast last week that he's 81, he says. I'm quoting him. He's not an old man. He has not lost a step. But he says, I'm an old man. I don't need the aggravation. I brought tears to my eyes on that podcast.
Yeah.
So that's where we stand. I think the book I put together, it's 17 chapters, 300 pages, and George Grimm, my co-author, and I agree that there is no fluff in the book and no extender. You read books where you got to write a whole bunch of stuff to fill it up. There's nothing that we feel. If anything, we do more editing to reduce the amount of pages than to just write to be writing. So like you said, it comes out in August, September at the latest, and it's going to be on Amazon, both digital and in hard copy. It's a thrill of a lifetime.
Ralph, last question. Here's a chance to play guru again. Do you have any words of wisdom for the youth of America, for the young kids who are out there listening? Any final words of wisdom?
No, I wouldn't take that responsibility. I would just say have fun. You're only going down the track. It's not around the track. We don't come back. It's down the track. And you're only going down the track once. And I have a dream that it would be nice if it weren't, if there was an afterlife, if there was this, that, and the other thing, if there was reincarnation, if we could do it all over again. I sincerely doubt it. So if you live, and this is not giving advice, but if you live as if it were one trip down the track, and then if it turns out that you were wrong, that's icing on the cake.
Yep.
But if you're not getting pleasure out of life because you fear an afterlife, or for any reason, if you're not getting the pleasure, you'd be cheated at the end if it comes to it. So always bet the over. How about that for some advice to the kids?
That's brilliant advice. Brilliant. Well, I just want to thank you. I mean, like I said, I just want to add one personal thing. If you had told me 5 years ago that I was going to be a podcaster, with my own personal show, I probably would have laughed in everyone's face. But the fact that you believed in me, and you actually got me to believe in myself, because I thought this is insane. I won't be able to do this, but you believed in me. And in many ways, I think you've got a lot of other people to believe in themselves as well. You've created this beautiful thing, and you've shown me a part of myself that I didn't really know ever existed. And the fact that I'm hosting this podcast right now and you're my guest, in a sense, it's my way of saying thank you, Ralph. And I want to say I love you, man. I do. I really love you. I love everyone in your family and everyone in the Comfortably Zoned Network family, okay? Because you made me a part of the family, and that is a gift, not only to me but to all our listeners, to everyone who listens to you. You're an inspiration, Ralph.
Well, you got me choked up, I must admit, Matthew. I have no response to that. I thank you for your being.
Thank you. Ralph, you take care. And stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, for next week's show, where I will be interviewing sports author Jeff Pearlman. Thank you, and good night. And you take care, Ralph.
Good night, my friend.
Good night,
and
my friend.
Thank you for listening, everybody.
Thank you. Okay.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices, and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.